you're watching the Daily Roundup by People's Dispatch, where we bring you some of the top stories from around the world. Let's take a look at the headlines. Colombian Vice-President denounces attempt on her life. Hundreds killed and injured by US and UK weapons in Yemen. Sudan teachers launch a fresh 3-week strike. French pension reforms denounced as unions prepare strike action. Colombian Vice-President Francia Márquez on Tuesday, January 10, denounced a new attempt on her life. Márquez on Twitter reported that her security team had found a highly destructive explosive device near her family home in the Yolombo village in the Suarez municipality in the Cauca department. She added that the device was destroyed in a controlled explosion by bomb disposal experts. The Vice President and Minister of Equality had planned to visit her hometown from January 7 to 9. For this reason, a prior inspection was carried out in the areas close to her residence when the explosives were found. Márquez, an environmental activist who became the first black woman vice president of Colombia against all odds, said that we won't stop working every day, day after day, until we reach total peace that Colombia dreams of and needs. We will not give up until it is possible to live in true harmony in each territory. This was not the first time that Márquez's life has been threatened. In May 2022, during a campaign rally in the capital Bogota, Márquez was pointed at with a laser when she was on stage addressing a multitude of supporters. In April 2022, the far-right paramilitary group Aguilas Negras or Black Eagles issued death threats against several members of the left-wing historic PAC coalition, including the then presidential candidate Gustavo Petro and the then vice presidential candidate Francia Márquez. The Black Eagles had also issued 2 other death threats to Márquez in March 2022. Violence against environmentalists, land defenders, human rights defenders, Afro-descendants, indigenous peasant and social leaders is not uncommon in Colombia. Paramilitary and drug trafficking groups have been targeting those who work to defend land and natural resources in their territories and pose a threat to the organization's illegal operations. Colombia has lived through almost 60 years of internal armed conflict over territorial disputes between paramilitary groups, drug traffickers, the army, and guerrillas, which has killed around 450,000 people and displaced over 8 million. According to an Oxfam report published on Wednesday, January 11, between January 2021 and February 2022, at least 87 Yemenis were killed and 136 were wounded in airstrikes carried out by the Saudi Arabia-led coalition using weapons supplied by the United Kingdom and the United States. The report, titled Armed Airstrikes Part of Pattern of Violence Against Civilians in Yemen, claims that at least 4 attacks were carried out daily during those 14 months, and a quarter of all those attacks were airstrikes. The period saw a total of more than 1,700 attacks by the Saudi-led coalition inside Yemen, out of which 431 were airstrikes. At least 19 of these airstrikes targeted hospitals and clinics. Overwhelming around 39% of attacks caused forced displacement of civilians as their homes or shelters were destroyed and they were forced to look for alternative accommodation. Oxfam also claimed that their numbers do not include widespread destruction caused to civilian infrastructure during the airstrike carried out by the Saudi-led coalition. According to the United Nations, close to 400,000 civilians have been killed in Yemen due to the war. More than 10,000 of them have been killed directly due to the war, while the rest died due to starvation, disease, and lack of health facilities caused by the destruction of civilian infrastructure and Saudi Arabia-led blockades of the country. Martin Butcher, Arms and Conflict Policy Advisor at Oxfam and the author of the report, claimed that intensity of these attacks would not have been possible without a ready supply of arms. He demanded that the United Kingdom's government and others must immediately stop the arms sales that are fueling war in Yemen. Saudi Arabia uses Typhoon and Tornado aircraft supplied by the United Kingdom and F-15 supplied by the United States to carry out airstrikes inside Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. The Houthi-controlled areas have the majority of Yemeni population and major cities such as capital Sana'a, Sada and Hodeidah port. The United Kingdom has sold weapons worth around 28 billion US dollars to Saudi Arabia since 2015 when the war began in Yemen, according to the Campaign Against Arms Trade or CAAT. This is in addition to billions of dollars worth of weapons sold by the United States to Saudi Arabia and its coalition partners such as the UAE. The UK-based CAAT has filed a lawsuit in the courts in the UK claiming that by deciding to sell arms to Saudi Arabia, the UK government is ignoring the possible war crimes. Oxfam claimed that the report is a part of its attempts to provide expert witness in support of the legal challenge. In our third story, teachers in Sudan are carrying on with their weeks-long strike after their demands continue to be unaddressed and unresolved by the government. The latest strike action launched by the teachers will last for the next 3 weeks and is expected to end on January 28. Teachers across the country have been striking for the last few months to protest low wages, which they say have become insufficient in the face of steadily rising inflation and the resulting cost of living crisis in the country. Reports noted that the government has given the teachers a 6% wage hike, which they say is a below-inflation inadequate raise for them to meet their monthly expenditure. Additionally, the teachers have been demanding that the government finally release to them the backdated, long overdue payments owed for the past several years, going as far back as 2020. The Sudanese Teachers Committee on Tuesday, January 10, in a press conference said that more than 16,000 schools are taking part in the strike, approximately 90% of all schools in Sudan. It said that the strike has been launched in the wake of a meeting that leaders from the teachers' union held with the finance minister last week, which it described as disappointing. According to the union, the minister not only refused to address the teachers' demands, but additionally went back on past promises and commitments that the government had made in previous negotiations. These include an increase in the minimum wage for teachers in the 2023 budget, along with setting up of a new allowance for teachers amounting to 50% of their basic salary. The government had further committed to paying off teachers for any discrepancies that may have occurred in their dues pending for the last 3 months. According to reports, instead of addressing and trying to resolve the issues faced by teachers, the government is resorting to making threats and retaliatory steps to scare and intimidate them from taking part in the strike. These include threatening teachers with transfers, dismissals, and even suspension of their salaries. Additionally, there have been reports of police personnel chasing after students who refuse to sit in exams to express their solidarity with the teachers' strike. In other places, the government is altogether suspending classes and exams in an attempt to neutralize the effect of the strike. And finally, the French government on Tuesday, January 10, in a controversial decision announced an increase in the retirement age of French citizens to 64 years, 2 years more than earlier. The government, headed by President Emmanuel Macron, additionally sought to reform the pension system in the country, which includes announcing already very unpopular changes. For example, the government has expressed its intention to increase the number of years a person has to work to be eligible to receive a full pension to 43 years. The proposed reforms include introducing new rules and metrics to calculate the pension amount for workers in the private sector, which will effectively result in them receiving reduced pensions. Women workers, along with those who have had long durations of unemployment, are reportedly going to be among the worst affected. The new reforms further target other aspects of social spending, such as special schemes for family care, health care, and others, with the government saying that the ultimate aim is to balance the social spending budget and ensure that it doesn't go into deficit. The proposed reforms have been roundly universally condemned from all quarters of society, with reports noting that reforms could result in a massive face-off between the government and the powerful trade unions in the country. The trade unions have already started calling for mass nationwide strikes and protests in order to mobilize opposition to the reforms and exert public pressure on the government to withdraw these reforms. The unions have described the reforms as brutal, with leftist and socialist parties terming them as archaic, cruel, and unfair. Even the far-right supremacist French leader Marine Le Pen has opposed the reforms and has expressed its determination to block it from passing in the French parliament. Reports noted that the reforms anyway face an uphill battle at being passed in parliament, as such a large, overwhelming section of the French population and working classes are against it. A number of trade unions have already come together and announced plans to stage a nationwide strike protesting the reforms on the 19th of January, followed by more strikes and protests in the coming days and weeks. And that's all we have for today's episode. For more such stories, visit our website peoplesdispatch.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.